guest is the CEO of Remote Agility Framework. Of course, I'm also part of Remote Agility Framework, and we're shamelessly repurposing this today to talk to you about the release of the new framework. It's been some time in coming, but before we get stuck into that, let me just remind you, come and join us at the Remote AF community. Just click on the community button on remoteaf.co. Join us in our Discord community. Plenty of people there talking about remote and leadership and the things of like that we're going to talk about today. Grab a look at our new white paper, which is the dynamically adaptive organisation. Say that 3 times and you'll end up going home. John, welcome.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So this is an interesting thing. I'm interviewing my boss. So I'm on my best behaviour today, apparently. So let's start with why are we releasing a new version of the framework, John?
Yeah, I think from its earliest inception with Remote AF, we had an intention that it would continually update over time, and we found with a number of patterns, there's been like multiple revisions. Those that have been with us a while would probably, have horrific memories of the earliest versions of the team launch canvas, as it was previously known. And over time, not just that one, but multiple have had some pretty significant updates. There's also some pretty reasonable feedback that spans all the tools that we use in Remote AF, particularly around things like language and applicability to different contexts. So it felt like, given the significance of some of the feedback that we had and how far some of the various tools have come, it made sense to sort of just try and get those changes out as quickly as possible. And that was easiest to deliver through a dedicated sort of amount of capacity over a short duration. So that's what we're doing this month. And outside of trying to come up with some kind of Android or Apple version update name, which I'm not that creative, saying version 2 made a lot of sense.
I had some names, but you would let me use them. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about what the update contains. I guess that's what people will be interested in. So, firstly, let's sort of start from the fact that a lot of people will be looking at the change to the name, John. So I just wanted to touch base with that, so you can see that we have a new logo, new and improved. But alongside that, what are the new elements that we've added to this release?
Yeah, so there's a couple of changes. Like there are some of the branding fixtures around the logo, and some of the color schemes have changed, which those that have probably been a bit more observant may have seen them adjust over the past couple of weeks. All that stuff will be seen throughout the tools post-August. So all the tools will be updated to reflect some of that new look and feel. The more material elements kind of breaks down into 3 key areas. The first is jargon. Since literally the first day I recall of Remote AF being in operation, we've been constantly challenged quite constructively and pushed by various members of our community and people that have worked with us over the years to decompress the language. We've got a lot of inherited terms, I suppose, from some of the pillars of knowledge, many of which I think are useful if you have an inherent understanding of the meaning, but it's not our role or our position in the world to provide some capability uplift around the body of knowledge attached to some of those terms. So we'll be bringing everything into sort of more of a common parlance phraseology, something that's the way I like to think of it is around like anyone should be able to pick up a Remote AF tool, like anyone sort of from a 14-year-old reading level, and they should be able to interact with it, understand it, and interpret it. As to the content and what gets filled out on them, well, that's going to be driven by the context, right? Like that's not something that we expect to sort of happen in reality when people are using this in their organizations. But being able to interpret what each activity within a tool does should be fairly self-evident for the average person. The second piece is one around bringing a bit more respect to the hybrids and those that are still co-located, and that's just simply making all of the tools print friendly. So this is something that we've observed on a fair few instances where people have had it like on site as opposed to the old school offsite, and they've wanted to print stuff out, which works. And due to the expertise of those individuals, I think it lives and breathes quite strongly. The consequence, though, is like because we didn't design them with that in mind in the first place, like we always assumed that this stuff would be digital. It's really hard for people to use their mouse button to scroll in when they're actually standing in front of the tool and they're about 2 meters away. So there'll be things around like updating the formatting, updating font sizes and things like that to make it legible. So live workshop facilitation in a room with your team is going to be something that will work a lot easier now. And the last part is around we haven't really given them a name. I affectionately refer to them as pathways, but these essentially processes where you're stitching multiple tools together to try and generate some kind of novel outcome based off an organization's intent. So to throw a few examples, say you need to realign a bunch of teams around a new strategy, or you potentially need to get teams restructured so they can deliver on an existing strategy and they're struggling a bit at the moment. That's not something that there's no one tool that you can use for that. That's something where you're going to probably need a few bits and pieces or potentially collect together a bunch of different tools. So that's something that we'll be providing some relatively sound advice based off the feedback we've gotten from our guides, as well as some of our own experiences.
There's also a couple of exciting additions to the framework, John. So we're talking about the remote or virtual obeyer design studio, and secondary to that also the governance material. You want to talk a little bit about that, or I can help you talk about some of that as well?
Well, yeah, I think in regards to the governance, you'd probably be far more qualified than me, but there is probably a bit to add. So we've noticed that when trying to introduce people to remote AF, generally speaking, we'll run into this kind of like this leveling discussion around like understanding when or where to use a particular pattern or where should people be looking. So we've broken things into 4 categories. Team, that's where the team stuff goes. Group, if you're looking at departments, portfolios, anything where a group of teams need to be gathered around a common objective, that's where that stuff goes. Executive, so when you're thinking about things like governance or setting internal policies, executing sort of restructures or recalibrations of your teams, defining and planning out your strategies from a more macro landscape rather than sort of a execution perspective. All of that stuff lives in the exec patterns. And then lastly, we've got adapt, which you just mentioned one of them being the virtual obeyer, and we've also got event design and backlog filtering there. These are things where they kind of form the miscellaneous bucket in that they can be applied potentially anywhere in an organization to solve any number of different problems. But that's kind of why they have their own category. They're kind of the things that you would usually look to bring in to complement or enhance another tool.
Great, yeah. And for those that are the governance material, what we're talking about there is how you govern the whole system of work. So don't walk away from this cast thinking it's just about your projects and your PMOs and that kind of thing. What we're talking about there, whilst that's part and parcel of what the patterns are involve, it's really how you look at governing the entire system of work, particularly when you move into a remote/hybrid or any of those frames of work. You literally have to change the way you govern your system of work. Otherwise, if you're only transitioning or touching the transitional workflow of your organization, which is, launching your teams in your group, then you really have to think about the rest of it, because otherwise you're going to have this 3-speed economy where you're literally going to bang into the way you govern the system of work, both your funding and governing. So very exciting stuff for us. John, the other question I have for you is, what does this mean to our guides? So we'll just point at our guides for a minute. If you're not a guide, we'll talk about that in a moment. But for the guides, what does this mean to them if they're listening?
For the guides, I think the two things that'll be the most interesting to them is first having print-friendly versions of this stuff. That's not only like in the process of making print-friendly versions, at least for the team and group patterns. As a consequence, we've kind of had to relook at things. There's a couple of tools where there's sort of these sections where we're trying to get a lot done in a really small time box, and it just didn't make sense. So we started expanding some of those, giving them their own time in the light, which also, for as many of the guys would know, can be a useful thing, because if you want to just run that in isolation, that's also a useful thing to do, and it's a lot easier to do now with some of those activities where they're high value, potentially could be something on their own. So in a lot of instances, they'll now be given their own sort of space for cohorts to work through. The other part that I think is probably going to be especially interesting, probably the most interesting part to the guides, will be these pathways. So there's a lot of synergy between using patterns, particularly if you're a guide who uses 1 or 2 patterns in isolation, because you can see how maybe some remote AF tools are useful, but they don't quite fit the problem that you're being presented in your workplace. That's where this update is going to become important to you, because we'll be providing guidance on, if you're dealing with a group situation like a delivery portfolio or a department, how do you maximize the ROI of the time you spend working through some of these tools? So, things that are agreed at those higher levels have like kind of a hierarchy and a pass down with care to the various teams and team members, and then how do they provide feedback back up, closing that feedback loop. A lot of this stuff you'll see play out really strongly in how we link and chain some of these tools together.
Brilliant. I think the other one that I want to focus on a little bit for the guides as well, we took a lot of feedback, as you said, over the period of time. It didn't fall on deaf ears, and one of those was around what's now known as the group planning. And so we have really looked at that in terms of the more dynamic environments that we're in at the moment. And, that a lot of the feedback that came to us was that, the big quarterly plannings and the PI increments and the big room plannings. Now, whilst they have uses in certain situations, a lot of our guides felt that with the dynamicism that's hitting organisations right now, that we weren't really focusing enough on how we transition to a more shortwave type of planning. So we've made some really good changes. You want to talk about that a little bit, John?
Yeah, and I might start by saying one of my slightly contentious quips. If you want to find a more effective way of doing quarterly planning in a remote fashion, this is probably not the tool for you. You can, but that's not really what it excels at. Group planning is intended to assist with 2 main things. The first one is trying to ease and enable a transition to doing more continuous planning, something that will ultimately reflect the various push and pull tensions that you feel within your organization without breaking your quarterly planning, if that's something you really want to hold on to for now or into the future. The other thing that it'll help with is basically bringing the planning side of things into the road mapping side of things in the one space. That's something that existing planning processes don't tend to do particularly well. It always kind of leaves this situation of like no one knows what's coming up until after the quarter has passed, potentially halfway into the next quarter. We're looking to address that head on. If what you're looking for is methods and approaches on how to preserve a strict quarterly planning process, I would heartily urge you to seek out the places where people are the experts in that. What we're talking about here is trying to push the envelope a bit further and do something that is going to be more responsive and adaptive to the current market forces and all the ones that we probably don't know about yet. It's only halfway through 2023. I'm sure something else will hit before the end of the year.
So one of the questions that's coming through, we were going to look at this anyway, but so I want to focus on the people who are watching this are non-guides and what this means to them. So one of the first questions is this guide thing. Does this mean this is a certification? Like, dare I say it, safe? Do you want to talk to that, John?
Yeah, certainly. No. So Remote AF is not open source. It's a licensed product. We put research and development into it, and we have an intention of being a sustainable business over a longer term. Another one that comes up a lot is should this be a SaaS product or something that we can just sort of like play with online? That one maybe in the future. I think that is very interesting, and I think it's more a question of when rather than if. That's a very logical conclusion for us to go down that path at a point in time. Regarding the certifications, no, that's not the nature of our business. We do credential guides from a view of recognizing their participation, but it is functionally a license. Those guides have immense capability, and we provide them as much support as they reach out to us for, ultimately. But particularly if you even want to spread outside of the non-guide space, guides are people who have access to the vast majority of the framework. They know how to apply those tools in anger and to good effect in organizations of any context. Outside of that, you're looking at those kind of non-guide space, and it's not like this is kind of really the big driver on why we don't push around certification too much. Like, we'll give you the digital badge and we'll talk about how awesome you are because you are a guide, and we'll always be in your corner. But when we talk about people who just need one tool because this stuff isn't their passion, they're not always chasing things around solving complex issues in organizations. Like, they're a team leader who just needs to make sure their team is running well. It's a space that they've not really tackled. Their really expensive MBA didn't really help them figure out this problem. No worries, we'll help you out with just the team thing. Multitude of different ways you can sort of decide to engage in that content if you'd like to. And we offer similar stuff across all of the other patterns as well.
That's brilliant. So let's talk about becoming a guide, because we've made a change with that as well.
Yes.
So quite frankly, previously, and many of the guys that are watching this will be nodding, going, we put them through a fairly extensive course, and obviously we charge for that. But I think it's good to talk about that, John, because I think people will be very interested in that.
Yeah. So with the guides course, and there's another reason why the approach of a certification doesn't make much sense, and I don't think it really respects the challenges that people are trying to face into. You turn up and you've probably got an idea around one or two problem statements in your organization that you really want to nail, or a particular kind of work that you want to get into, and then we teach you everything all at once. And some of this stuff, right, like when you think about how it was created, it wasn't like one or two people having an opinion on how something should be done. It was done in a cohort, and it's, through my own good fortune that I've been with the company for a very long time, I have a pretty sound understanding of how all the patterns work. And so do a lot of guides, but that's something that is developed over time with experience and following up conversations. And it's not something that you can really condense into like a 1 or 2 week situation. We even tried doing it over the course of a month at one point, and it's still just too much. Like, you don't have anything to tie it to if it's not a problem you're facing into. So what do we do about it? Well, the answer has been, probably for about 3 or 4 months or so is we actually just spend some dedicated one-on-one time with people when they want to become a guide. We help them talk through how they can apply these tools to a pattern in that context, discuss some of the hairy questions, provide a little bit of that upfront, here's how everything hangs together, here's some of the base concepts that you need to have a handle on if you want to be able to use this stuff well. And then we let them go off into the sunset and run that stuff. Now, obviously half a day, you're not going to really be able to communicate everything, probably just one or two things. And that's okay, because for those guides, and I would extend this also to any existing guides, we've done this a number of times and we probably will continue to do it long into the future, where, if you're having trouble or want to apply a tool and you've got some questions because the facilitation guide doesn't answer everything, and you can't find through our various online resources like the right answer, give us a shout. We'll make time for you. Like, the whole idea is that through the promise of becoming a guide, you get our support. Like, we're in this, like, guides are the primary vectors ultimately that this stuff makes good changes for organizations. So it's in our every interest to make sure that guides are able to do that and do that well.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing. I like to talk on that because, you said we've been doing this for a while now. This is we're into our third year or so, I believe, John, if I'm right. And, over that period of time, we've worked with some very good organisations. So I'm going to do the mic drop and, drop a few names here. But, so we've worked with Spotify, Pixar, Laminex, Home Office, Bupa, Australian government organisations. So we know that this stuff works and we know how it works. So if you're considering becoming a guide, reach out to us and we can talk through it, as John said. And if you're an existing guide and you're having problems or you haven't been, game to use the patterns, that's what we're here for as well. So I just wanted to extend that out just a little tad further. With the guides, John, last thing there, what do they actually get access to? So that's a question that they get very regularly. What do we give them access to?
All team, group, and adapt patterns, and it is a prerequisite for accessing any of the executive stuff. The reason why we don't just throw that out into the wilds is essentially it is a bit hot to handle. And it's different between which one you were talking about, right? Like, and you'd probably be able to talk to some of this a bit better than I would, but if you want to look at something like governance, like I like to think of that in simple terms as, doing a Marie Kondo on your organization's rules. So it's like, does this policy spark joy in your life? Well, no, here's how you get rid of it. It's kind of like my fairly layman's terms of it. Navigating that problem and some of the things that you'll be facing into is a vastly different set of consequences for it not going well than, say, going down the path of an operating model design, where you're probably going to be looking at a lot more things to do around value delivery, sort of capacity, headcounts, things like that. Like, there might be overlaps, sure, but just because you learn one doesn't mean you can do the other. And that's kind of where we need to be a little bit cautious around, just sort of opening up all of that stuff. In terms of how you go about learning it, we've got some things up on the website as it stands. Feel free to go take a look. But largely, it's going to be more of that peer-to-peer, working with you through a problem, something in a more specific context. Over a longer period of time, I'd like to think that we can start demystifying some of it to such an extent that it is reasonable to provide some asynchronous training on and that kind of stuff. But that is a longer journey than between now and the end of August.
Yeah, and also don't forget to add into that, we have a community that's wrapped around this as well. Part of my role as the VP of product and community is not just making the stuff, it's actually talking with the community and supporting you. So you heard me at the beginning of the cast talking about join us on Discord by our community by clicking on remoteaf.co and joining that community. The good thing about there's lots of practitioners, not just us at Remote AF, that have been using this, and everybody's happy to reach out and help. Or if you've got a question or whatever, we're really happy to have you on there. So In saying all of that, John, the big question is, when do they get it?
Before my birthday. No, it is before my birthday, but September 1st-ish. We're essentially targeting the end of August to have all the changes done. There will probably be, there's usually a bit of a, not a cooling off period, but to make sure that this stuff is set up so it can be fulfilled easily. There's a little bit of administration that goes into that. So you can expect it by the first week of September, certainly, or by the end of the first week of September. So it's one of those things where you might want to let us know, reach out if you've got any specific questions. But by the time you get to the first Friday in September, I'm just going to be cheeky and check dates on my calendar. September 1st is a Friday. Excellent. I'm going to make promises on live. Friday the 1st of September, Australian time, at least before I go to bed, it'll be there.
Very nice, very nice. And one of our LinkedIn users is obviously a guide, and your security stops us from knowing who you are, but that's a nice little quote there, which I think is great. I just thought I'd flash that up on the screen, so thank you for that. So we're pretty much at the end of it. So the last thing I probably want to say from this cast is we use a talking remote, obviously, which is part of Remote AF to look at all the different things that are happening out there and bring them to you. So it's not a money-making exercise. We do this to give back to the community. So there's a couple of things around that. If there's somebody or something you'd like to discuss or talk to, drop us a line. That'd be fantastic. Easy enough to get us. Just through the website. The second thing about that is keep an eye open in the next couple of weeks. We'll be making sure that not only do we touch base with all those sorts of things, but we'll be bringing some of the people who are using these patterns on and how they've been using them actually out in the real world. So you're not just hearing from a couple of guys who are running an organization and throwing it out there in a nice little pretty box and saying this stuff works. We actually want to give you a chance to hear it from some people that have actually been using it in anger in their organizations, so you can hear some of the things that have happened with it. In saying that, John, anything else you'd like to say before we go?
Thank you all for coming.
Look, it's been great to have our illustrious CEO on Talking Remote. Don't forget, if you want to join our community, I've said a couple of times today, remoteaf.co, click the community button. Join us, grab a copy of the white paper on dynamically adaptive organizations. It's something that we're very, very passionate about here at Remote AF, and thanks for being with us.
Absolutely.